Hey everybody, so in this video I'd like to talk about visual reminders versus true logical notation in strategic piano practice. I want to show you this real example from real students' music. So this is a virtuosic arrangement of Interstellar, and here I've written some pretty visual reminders, and this actually wasn't necessary for this student, but often I like to write these to show students where the fractions of a measure are, how it's split up. And then this is my actual logical notation in my logical methodology for keeping track of all the little sections that we've done to quality. And I can go into some detail about the distinction between these two. And the reason strategic piano practice matters is because I think of it as faster piano progress without cutting corners. In fact, instead of lesser quality, we have a higher quality because we're able to do smaller sections to a much better quality than normal, and our decision making itself is better. So I like to give this brief example often. Instead of practicing 3 pages mindlessly over and over again, most people know that if you isolate the specific section or line that's actually giving you trouble, that could be, for instance, literally like a 10 times better return on your time and energy because you've actually isolated some of the problems. Well, if you practice 1/8 of a measure with great strategy as opposed to a single measure, that could honestly be just as beneficial a decision in that moment as opposed to this too difficult one measure. Like you just saw a very difficult measure, for example. It might be the best decision possible to practice much smaller. That could end up being like 100 times return on your time compared to playing 3 pages mindlessly. So anyway, on this channel, I hope to share with you strategies, mindsets, methods, etc., often on my own creation that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully other areas of your life as well. So I wanted to make this video to show this little distinction between these reminders and the actual notation that I write and that my students write in order to keep track of what we've done so far, because sometimes there's been a little bit of confusion around it. So the reminders are really there for beginners, beginner intermediate students, and any students that have trouble visually telling and ascertaining where are the fractions of a measure and how does it split up. Because in my methodology, as some of you might know, and for anybody that's new, when we talk about sets, it's any given section of the music plus the following note. So for instance, a 1 measure set's 1 measure plus the following note or chord. A half measure set's half a measure plus the following note or chord. 2 measures set's 2 measures plus the following note or chord. But this assumes, like, if you're doing fractions of a measure, that you can identify where those fractions are. And so, if you are in a piano program, you can always ask your teacher to help. There's, of course, other online tutorials and things. So this is assuming that well, actually, I guess this isn't assuming you know where the fractions are, because I'm going to show you the visual reminders here. So let me see. Well, if you are able to identify where the sections of a measure are, then you could mark these symbols in this way. If you do need help, then I would say that you can then ask your teacher, or if as you continue to study music theory, then you'll be able to more easily identify the fractions of a measure. Sometimes you can visually tell though. So for instance, this is a very complicated measure, but you might be able to roughly see, like, oh, I see. So this is the first, let's see if this is writing. Oh, I think I might have to adjust this a bit. You might be able to roughly see like where the first half and second half of the measure. So for instance, we got this first half here, and then we have this second half over here. So you can, even if you count it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's kind of like one thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's like another thing over here. So we've got 16 things here, and then over here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can kind of see that it's split up visually this way. So even as a relative layperson, hopefully you're not playing something that's this difficult if you don't know how to formally count measures, you can kind of break things up just by visually looking at it. So here you might be able to see that, oh yeah, that's 8 small notes, this is another 8 small notes, this is another 8. So you can make educated guesses, and you can probably see, so that here are the quarters of a measure, and then you could also likely see that you could, group it every 4 notes in the right, 1 note in the left. So this would be other ways of maybe logically deducing, if you're lost, how do you split up the measure into these kind of little fractional elements But often, to make it easier for the student, I will write in some of these markings myself. And I already pre-wrote these out just so that you could see what it might look like. And this is, of course, like a pretty complicated example. I wanted to give one that was more complicated even than normal. And so the stars that I write, this might be reminding the student like, oh, you got to play from star to star. So you want to play like one measure plus the next note, for instance, from here to here. And if I'm talking about, so that would be a one measure set, one measure plus the next note. Half measure set, it could be from triangle to triangle. So like I showed earlier, like this is half of a measure, because this would be the first half of the measure. And then we also include the next note or chord as well. So it's half a measure plus the next note. Now the next half of the measure would be, of course, this yellow. And then here, if we did a half measure set, which would be half a measure plus the next note, it would be half, this yellow part, half a measure, plus technically the next note after that. So we always want to include that next note or chord as well. So I might use these triangles, and the colors are just for clarity's sake. It doesn't really matter what colors they are either. It doesn't even matter what the symbols are really, but this is usually what I'll use. So then if I ask the student to practice half measure sets, I may say play from triangle to triangle, triangle to triangle. I often will use circles for quarter measure sets. So it's a quarter of a measure plus the next note, quarter of a measure plus the next note, quarter of a measure plus the next note, etc. And then sometimes if we split it down this small, I can use these little swirly things for eighth measure sets. So that means play eighth of a measure plus the next note, eighth of a measure plus the next note. So all this is to let the student easily see how this measure splits up into little fractions. And sometimes we might even go smaller than that. So for example, let's say, actually, what color have I not used? I guess green. Let's say that we want to split this up into like 16th measure sets. So it's like a 16th of a measure plus the next note. I might still go smaller and do this, like every two notes in the right hand plus one more note. That would be a 16th measure set because it's a 16th of a measure plus the next note. Two notes in the right hand plus the next note. And the reason we might split up this small is because an eighth measure set or a 16th measure set might be the thing that the student's able to do in the moment. Anything larger would be too difficult. And so then I could mark this way. And of course, if we were doing even smaller, I could still come up with like some other symbol, right? It could be that we're marking even smaller things, like 30-second measure sets, for instance. So all of those are examples of visual reminders so that the student can very easily ascertain where are the fractions of a measure, where do I play from and to. Now, the actual logical notation, and there's lots of examples on the channel. Again, if you search David Chang logical notation, you look at the logical methodology playlist on my channel, you search David Chang 14 layers of strategy, you'll find the logical notation, all different contexts. So this is when we use like different types of brackets, curly brackets for both hands and square brackets for separate hands. And this is when we've actually practiced a given section to the quality that we want. And broadly, we'll just say that it's to a very good quality and that probably it's from memory, and there may be some other parameters as well. I think I have another video that's called something like what I mean by quality and fast piano progress or something, so you can also search for that one. So in terms of the actual logical notation, so all of this other stuff, it's really just to help the student to see where the fractions of a measure are. And usually it's going to be a lot simpler than this measure. I wanted to choose one purposely that was more difficult so you could see some of the different types of symbols I might draw. But when we see this one, as you might know, it means one measure plus the next beat, right? So the number within the brackets, it's always the number of measures. In this case, it's one measure. And then because it's curly brackets, this is referring to both hands. I've done both hands to a certain quality that I think is good from memory, all the way from there. And then I've included the next note as well. And I've done it correctly once. I don't need to remember it long term. We'll use other strategies later to combine them with other measures and so on. And then over here, I wrote a half. So this means I did this half of a measure plus the next chord. And that's why I've written these curly brackets and then written half here. And then over here, these are examples of separate hand sets. because they're within regular square brackets. So if they're square brackets, it's referring just to that specific hand that, or I guess we can say hand that it's aligned with. So in this case, we did a quarter of a measure, because there's a quarter within the brackets, quarter of a measure plus the next note, just in the right hand alone. And so that's why this is notated here. Quarter of a measure plus the next, so that's why this is notated here. Now here we have half of a measure plus the next note, and that's why I've written half in these square brackets right below the left hand. So I just wanted to make this distinction clear. It's only when you've written numbers within these brackets that you've really used the logical notation in my logical methodology. So when I see this, that means that we've done it to quality, and even just once, probably from memory, to as good a standard as we can muster, and that means that that's been completed. It's not that it's in progress, but it's been done, at least that one time. All of this other stuff, this doesn't actually mean that you've done anything. This just means, well, it doesn't mean that anything's in progress. It doesn't mean anything's completed. It's just a friendly reminder to you, like, oh, how do I do eighth measure sets, like an eighth of a measure plus the next note? How do I do quarter measure sets? And so usually they're not necessary to continue to write once you've reached a certain level or you've just gotten used to the methodology. So that's what I would say. And then just to be clear, because I didn't do other examples here, if you did, again, 2 measures plus the next beat, we would write a 2. And let's say that it's both hands, I would write a 2 within curly brackets, vertically aligned over the starting point of whatever section I'm practicing. If you did 4 measures plus the next beat, I would write a 4 within curly brackets if it's both hands, vertically aligned over the starting point. And then all of that other little notation is they're just friendly little visual reminders so that you don't get confused. And I think students can write them in themselves, and sometimes they will. And that will also communicate to me if they know actually where are the quarters of a measure, where are the halves of a measure. So you definitely can write in some of these symbols yourself, and you can hopefully ascertain where they are. Hopefully if you have a teacher as well, you might ask them, like, am I identifying the quarters or eighths or halves of a measure correctly? That will help you to better strategically practice. And then when you've actually completed a given section, then you can write the number of measures, even if it's a fraction, within curly brackets if it's both hands, and within square brackets if it's separate hands, vertically aligned over the starting points, always including the following note as well too. So the true logical notation, it is only the numbers that are within brackets, and that means that it's been completed one time to quality. So I hope that this clarifies some things. I think I'm gonna have another video soon where I'm talking about larger sets, maybe like 4s, 8s, 12s, and possibly even above that. And maybe that'll answer some other questions too. So if you found this valuable, please like, subscribe, let people know about the channel, and looking forward to the next one.